prices for bikes these days are pretty astronomical, actually. I mean, 10, 15 grand for a road bike, that's quite commonplace. I definitely can't stomach that. So I've always built my bikes with parts from China and AliExpress because the value is just unrivaled. But although the bikes I build are comparatively very, very cheap, they often come with their own intricacies and kind of problems to overcome. It's come loose on me, I think twice. The carbon has cracked. I think this is going to be a problem. That does not sound very good. I do have a little bit of an issue. I reckon I'll be lucky to get 2,500 miles. It's completely clapped out, starts squeaking and gets rusty. It is pretty punishing. The rattling did get a lot worse. These sometimes present themselves when you're building the bike and putting it together, but sometimes the problems can take a while to come to the surface. So today I'm going to go through 4 of what I think are the best Chinese bikes I've ever built. Again, all of these bikes are built almost exclusively with parts from AliExpress and other direct-to-consumer Chinese brands. I'll go through the good, the bad, what's changed since I've built them, and any problems that have cropped up as well, because there have definitely been a few. So yeah, let's crack on. Right then, let's kick things off with the Steel road bike. It's my most recent build. I put it together about 4 months ago, and as a brief overview, it cost me just over 1,400 quid in parts. This is the full breakdown if you're interested. The basis is a gorgeous steel bike frame from this brand called Seaboard. I've thrown on a 2x11 mechanical group set. It has external cabling, although the rear brake hose does go partly through the frame, and the weight comes in at 8.65 kilos. Not too bad for a kind of steel bike with an extra large frame, in my opinion. So this steel road bike that I've got here behind me, well, it's probably the bike that's changed the least actually since I built it, but I just want to take a second to show you what it looks like, because I think it's got to be one of the best looking builds I've ever put together. It just looks really clean and really classic, and I love the fact that the steel isn't a bright steel, it's kind of a dark grey look, so it almost looks like a titanium actually, but either way, I think it's a fantastic looking bike. Now, the one thing that has changed on this build since I kind of put it together, and it's kind of inconsequential, at least for me and what I do, and it's the wheel set, because I swap out wheels so often to review. The ones that I originally built it with, nothing wrong with them. They're from a brand called Riot on AliExpress. They were incredibly cheap. Yeah, nice set of wheels, but these ones I put on relatively recently. They're from a company called Upvine. I think they're called their D60 Pro Plus wheel set. Really fantastic set of wheels. 60mm deep, nice bladed carbon spokes, and custom hubs as well. Yeah, I've had these on for a good few weeks. They are a lovely set of wheels, so review on these potentially coming soon. So the things I like about this bike, firstly, I love the way it looks, as mentioned. Secondly, the way it rides as well. So it's a steel frame, and there is something about a steel road bike. I didn't really realize it until I kind of built this thing up and ridden it, but I think there's a bit of elasticity, a little bit of springiness in the material. It just soaks up all of the little bumps and rough patches on the road in a way a carbon frame can't really match, especially, well, it's especially useful on kind of choppy English B roads like this one. It just rides like butter. It is honestly fantastic. I also quite like this group set that I've put on it, although there is one thing which I'll come on to in a second. It's the Sensar Empire HRD group set. So it's a 2x11 mechanical shifting group set, so it uses cables with hydraulic disc brakes front and back, and I think this thing cost me 150 quid when I got it on AliExpress. So the shifting at the front and the back is absolutely fine, nice and quick, nice and crisp, no issues there. It uses a kind of SRAM double tap-esque shifting setup if you're unfamiliar, so one click to upshift and a big swing to downshift like so. However, I do have a little bit of an issue specifically with the hoods. Now, the shifters themselves, the hoods, they are quite comfortable, don't get me wrong, but they're undeniably quite large and bulky, right? Not a massive issue for me because I do have quite large hands, but if you do have smaller hands, I can foresee that being a little bit of a problem, especially when kind of reaching to shift with the brake levers. But the kind of main gripe I have with this group set is the rubber they've chosen for the hoods. For whatever reason, the rubber on this particular shifter is different from this one. The rubber on this is definitely worse, and I'll show you the problem, right? So on this shifter, the rubber is still nice and tight, no real issues, conforms to the shape fine. But on here, the rubber is coming
becoming a little bit loose. I've only been using this group set for the last few months, maybe 600 miles on it, something like that, and for the rubber to already be coming loose, yeah, not fantastic, I've got to be honest. But that's my only real gripe with this thing. Other than that, it's been a real joy to use actually, especially the shifting method, that double tap-esque shifting. Once you kind of get your head around it and get used to it, it is a lovely way to shift your bike. I've also really enjoyed using this carbon chain set from this brand called RIRO. I can't remember what I paid for this thing, so I'll put it up on screen. But just the overall quality of the construction and the choice of materials is very, very high. Shifting in and out of the chain rings is great, nice and quick, nice and crisp, and no creaks or groans out of this thing at all. However, this is a dub standard, so the axle diameter for that chain set is 28.99, whereas the bottom bracket standard for this frame is BSA. So let me get back to the garage and I'll explain why I think this is going to be a problem in the pretty near future.
So BSA as a bottom bracket standard is designed to work kind of primarily with Shimano cranksets that have a 24mm axle across all their road group sets. When you try and squeeze a dub crankset into a BSA standard bottom bracket, the axle is bigger, it's thicker, it's 28.99, basically 29mm in diameter, and you start to face some drawbacks with the actual BB shell. In order to accommodate that larger diameter axle, generally two different trade-offs have to be made on the BB shell. The first is that the actual wall thickness on the BB shell tends to be thicker with a standard BSA 24 bottom bracket, so it doesn't really come across on camera, but the actual, there's a lot more meat on this BB shell than there is on this one. It just tends to be machined a little bit thinner to accommodate that larger diameter axle. Thinner walls basically mean that as you're putting power through a bottom bracket shell like this, it tends to warp and deform a little bit easier, kind of pulling the bearing out of true, as it were, increasing the wear on those bearing surfaces. Combine that with the fact that the actual bearings tend to be thinner in these BSA dub bottom brackets than they are on the standard BSA 24 ones. These are a bit more robust. So both of those things combined mean that these BSA dub bottom brackets, in my experience, don't tend to last very long at all. I've been running this one for about 600 to 800 miles, something like that, and it still spins pretty freely, but let me bring my mic up close. So with the mic right here, hopefully you can hear, it still spins pretty freely, but the bearings, they're grinding slightly after, such a short distance. I reckon I'll be lucky to get 2,500 miles out of this bottom bracket, and if I was to do this again, I'd definitely choose a Shimano standard crankset rather than dub.
Now, one other thing worth mentioning about this bike, actually, it rides beautifully, like I've said, but at very high speed, say when I'm bombing down a descent at around like 30 mile an hour plus. The rear does feel a little bit loose, like it's not completely planted. I've swapped between a few different wheel sets and it always feels the same, so I'm pretty sure it's down to the frame itself. I think it's that sort of natural flex and elasticity you get with steel. It gives the bike a lovely springy feel most of the time, but when you hit a bit of rough or uneven tarmac at speed, the rear can feel a little skittish. Maybe that's just part of the kind of steel experience, that bit of character you either kind of love or learn to live with. If you've ridden steel yourself, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Is that lively feel part of the charm, or maybe a bit of a trade-off in this particular instance?
I am once again asking for your financial support.
Now, I always recommend Siroko. They've been a clothing sponsor for ages, so some of the stuff I've got from them is years and years old at this point. And as I'm doing, an update on durability and stuff like that, what about these clothes I always recommend?
Let's start with these bibs. They're coming up to 4 years old now, have been washed close to 500 times, and they look pretty damn good if you ask me. Zero loose threads on the main body or the straps, mainly because they use a type of really durable stitch called a flat lock stitch. It lays flat against the body, hence the name, and allows a lot of stretch in the fabric while remaining very strong. There is one part of the straps here where the elastic has given out ever so slightly, and the padding inside has lost a tiny bit of give over the years, but other than that, they're still super comfortable, they fit well, and still look great. It's a similar story with this SRX Pro jersey of theirs, actually, coming up on 4 years old, and again, it's been through the wash hundreds of times. It's kind of a race-inspired jersey, so the fabric is very lightweight, but again, zero loose threads or torn fabric. And that's because you can see additional reinforcement has been added to high-stress areas. These additional patches behind the rear pockets here, and even on the sleeve, you can see they've added a little stitch at the very end to prevent fraying. The only real wear is a bit of discoloration around the neck and sleeves. It's sun cream mixed with sweat, and that's kind of the main culprit, and it's pretty much unavoidable with white cycle gear. But discoloration aside, there is very little wrong with this jersey. In fact, on both of these bits of cycle clothing, I think it's pretty hard hard to fault on durability, actually.
So yeah, if you want to check out Siroko, I'll put a link in the description, or you can scan this QR code. It'll get you 10% off the entire site, and anything you buy helps me out a little bit too, which is cool. Anyway, thanks for listening. Let's get back to it. Okay, next up is this one here. Behind me, it's my carbon endurance style road bike. I built this bike last year, and one of the main reasons I put this thing together was to kind of challenge myself in a way. So this frame, it's a really good value one from this company OG Evkin, which many of you will be familiar with if you watch my stuff. It requires a fully internal cable routing. So you can see there are no exposed cables up at the front, yet I'm running, well, it's a mechanical group set. A lot of the frames on sale nowadays, including a lot of the cheaper ones actually, only offer internal cable routing. So with this build, I really wanted to challenge myself to put a budget mechanical group set onto a frame like this that should really, well, ideally be used with an electronic group set, right? But I'm happy to report this thing works really well. Running through the frame and also crammed into this integrated handlebar here and then down through the headset. You've got 4 sets of cables, 2 brake lines for the front and the rear hydraulic brakes, and then 2 sets of gear cables, again, for the cassette at the back and chain rings at the front. It all worked really well. Gear shifting at the front and the back was really crisp, although I will share an update on that in a second. But let me hit you with the stats on this thing. I'll go ahead and put the parts list up on screen for you, but when this was first built, you could put it together for just over 1,500 quid, and the weight on this thing, including pedals and bottle cage, was 7.7 kilos. Not half bad for a budget build, if you ask me. So again, the one major update I've made since putting this together, new set of wheels. So I've had these on the last few weeks and they're really nice. So they're from the same manufacturer as the frame, so I'm rocking an OG Evkin frame, and they sent across their latest set of wheels. Yeah, 50mm deep carbon rim here, nice profiling, and they look really flash as well. Plus they ride really nicely on a lot of the B roads that I ride around here. So review on these coming soon. They are a little more expensive than the ones I originally built this bike up with. Those were 300 quid. These ones here are 530 quid. So still really good value and more lightweight as well. So with these new wheels on, the weight was 7.7, but now with these it's 7.57. So we've dropped about 130, 140 grams, which is pretty decent, not to be sniffed at. Another update I made, when I put it together, I fed the brake lines and the gear cables down through the down tube here to get out the back, but I didn't use any sound deadening foam over the top, basically because it didn't arrive in time. It's this stuff. So it's just squishy foam, and you feed it over the top of the cables to stop it rattling inside the carbon when you go over bumps and stuff. At the time, it wasn't actually too bad, but as the cables were settled, the rattling did get a lot worse. So a few months back, I took an hour or two to run some of that foam over the cables. As it happens, I managed to get it all done without having to pull all of the cables out of the headset and redo everything. I did it all via the bottom bracket. So I took the crankset and the bottom bracket out and did it all through that access point. I did have to bleed the brakes at the rear again, but with a little bit of help from my daughter. It was all fine. Took about hour and a half to get it done, but it was definitely worth it. Now this thing is completely silent over all bumps. Now shifting performance, right? So as mentioned, this is a fully mechanical group set. It's quite a cheap one. The L-TWOO R9, I think I picked it up for 120 quid, although I have seen it go for as low as 90 actually. But as you can see, the front chain rings are cable actuated, as well as the gears at the back. And that's all well and good, but when dealing with a fully internally routed frame like this, those cables have got to navigate some quite sharp corners, which increases friction on the cables and can degrade shifting performance. So when I put this thing together initially, I wasn't expecting shifting to be particularly good, if I'm honest, but it actually blew me away. The shifting when I first built this was really, really crispy. However, over the last winter, I did a lot of riding in the wet on this bike, and it seems like the shifting at the front was affected because of it. So basically, as you're riding along, water is obviously going to get sprayed up the back of the bike by the wheel, right? And I'm not sure if it's going to come across on camera, so I'll put up some pictures. But the cable outer for the shifting at the front pops out the frame, and then out the top of that, you've got the gear cable itself. It gets exposed slightly. It seems like after a while, water started to make its way and seep down between the cable and the housing. That affected the cable itself. It looks like it got oxidized. The shifting was a lot tougher, a lot less smooth as a result. So this is the actual gear cable that I pulled out of the bike. And if I kind of zoom in, it should demonstrate the problem. So the nice shiny bit of cable. That's basically the part that was up inside the down tube here, whereas that dull gray looking cable, that's the bit that was exposed to water, and it's basically covered in like an oxide type coating, slightly rough, and it basically made the shifting at the front a lot less smooth. Like I said, it was quite difficult actually to shift from the small ring into the big with this additional friction caused by this oxidized cable. So I did two things. Number one, obviously replaced that cable, and number two, I got hold of some of this stuff. So my friend Ollie, who worked in a bike shop, sourced this for me. It's official Shimano cable grease, and this stuff is absolutely incredible. In the past, when cabling up bikes, I've used either a bit of 3-in-1 oil or maybe some multi-purpose grease over the cables to reduce friction, but this stuff is, yeah, it's next level. I mean, it's purposely designed for this one specific application, so I knew it was going to be good. But either way, very impressive. The real test though is whether it's going to last the winter, because I assume the water repellency on this is a bit better than the stuff I normally use, so we'll have to wait and see. Either way, the shifting at the front is back to normal. Worth pointing out as well, shifting at the rear was never really affected because it's difficult for water to work its way up inside here, so that's always been fine. So yeah, those are the updates I've made, but I really love this bike. It's such a good all-round road machine. It's a large frame, which is the equivalent of about 58 centimeter, but the geometry for me is absolutely perfect, especially for longer days in the saddle. It just fits me so well. Also, for those that don't know, I do have a real soft spot for this group set here from L-TWOO. It's just the value is unrivaled by virtually anything else. And like I said, the shifting performance is really good. It's not quite up there with official Shimano 105, but it certainly gets close. And unlike the Sensei groups that I showed on the steel road bike, the ergonomics are a bit better in my opinion, and the rubber is still absolutely perfect, nice and taut after, yeah, more than a year of use. Okay, so this is my more kind of aggressive, racy Aero road bike here. Again, the frame is from this brand OG Evkin and does look quite similar to this one down here, basically because the colors are the same, but the geometry is completely different. As mentioned, it's, you're much more aggressive on this particular bike, and there have been a number of changes to this since I initially built it up. We've had new bar tape, new wheels, new brake calipers, new disc rotors, new front derailleur on this electronic group set actually, which I'll cover in a second, and even new tires as well. Now let's quickly cover the total cost and the weight of this bike actually, because when I put it together 7 or 8 months ago, it was the most expensive bike I'd ever built, mainly because I didn't choose bottom of the barrel parts for everything like I normally do. I actually chucked some decent stuff on this. Now the build cost, I'll put the parts list up on screen. It came to just under 3,000 quid, but I've made some upgrades since then, as mentioned, the most obvious of which are these new wheels. So these are the ones that I originally built the bike with. They're the C5 Von2 wheels from Fastsports, really lovely, and $1,100 for the pair. These ones are a bit more expensive, 1,300 bucks. These are the Velo 6 from Elite Wheels, a one-piece carbon wheel with 6 chunky bladed spokes on here. I think they look absolutely stunning, really make the bike pop, and I always get comments on these whenever I take this bike out and about. Now these are actually the version 2 of this wheel set, because I tested the version 1s, these ones here, last year, and they rode really nicely, but I will say the lateral stiffness, so their resistance to side movement, was some of the weakest, the lowest of any wheel set I've ever tested. Whereas on the version 2s here, they've changed the carbon layup and the profile of these bladed spokes here and really improved that. So the lateral stiffness now is on par with a decent steel spoked wheel set. Now you can use this wheel set for general road riding, as I've been doing on this bike here, but let's be honest, their main focus is going to be for racing and triathlons, stuff like that, right? Now I'll do a dedicated review on these coming up soon, because they undoubtedly feel very fast and they certainly look the part, but there are some drawbacks, right? So the side profile of these wheels is quite large, so in a crosswind you do feel quite easily buffeted over, and also they're a harsh ride, because as I'm sure you can imagine, there's virtually no vertical compliance in a one-piece carbon wheel like this, so any imperfections or bumps in the road get transmitted straight up into your hands, hence necessitating this other upgrade I've made with the handlebars. A few months back, I was out for an all-day ride on this bike and got back and my palms were just absolutely battered, because I'd been resting them on the tops here, and originally the bar tape I put on was quite cheap and quite thin, so I upgraded it to this stuff. It's from Trek, I think, and it's got a nice bit of squish, bit of silicone backing to the bar tape, so it just takes the edge off because you've got this super stiff Aero frame and these ridiculously stiff wheels here. So yeah, you have to have some decent bar tape with a setup like this. As mentioned, I've also upgraded these brake calipers here, but I've covered these in a couple of different videos, so I won't dwell on them. Basically, they're 4-piston brake calipers from this brand called Z-Race on AliExpress. They cost me 75 quid for the front and the back. They're, well, in my opinion, the braking performance is much better than the stock calipers that came with this L-TWOO electronic group setup here. But yeah, I've done a dedicated video on these, so check out that if you're interested. In addition, I also changed the brake rotors out because the ones I initially put on them, I wasn't particularly impressed with the braking and the bite that I got out. So I chose these ones. They're kind of dupes of the SRAM Centerline X rotors. I got them on AliExpress for about 10 or 15 quid each, a decent upgrade, and I also color matched the purple to the brake calipers and the frame, which is pretty cool. Now let me cover the upgrade to the tires very quickly because it's quite interesting actually. So when I first built up this bike using those Fast Sports wheels, I outfitted them with the same tires as these. So Goodyear Eagle Sport in 700 by 30C because they're decent, comfortable, grip is good, and they're good value as well, about 30 quid each. But considering this is now upgraded to like a full-on Aero road machine, the tires were due an upgrade. So these wheels are specifically designed with 700 by 28C tires in mind. So I slapped on these Continental Aero tires, and they've got this really interesting tread pattern. So can you see they've got just these cutouts, and that's all the tread pattern there is, because the aerodynamics for these tires are, well, they're designed in collaboration with this company Swiss side, and aerodynamically at least, they're meant to be the fastest road tires available. Now, I'm not entirely sure they're worth it at about 80 or 90 quid per tire, but they certainly do look the part, and wet weather grip as well, from my experience, is absolutely phenomenal with these tires. So yeah, not entirely sure they're worth the money, but they do fit the theme for this build really nicely, and I certainly like them. Now, before I cover the issue with the front derailleur, which is the biggest problem I've had with this bike actually, let me cover the cost and the weight. So when this was initially built, like I said, just under 3,000 quid, and the weight was 7.38 kilograms. However, as it sits right now with all these upgrades, if you were to build this bike as it sits here, you'd be looking at about 3,300, 3,400 quid, so an additional 300 or 400 pounds. And the weight is actually more, so it's 7.72 kilograms because the wheels are a little bit heavier, the disc rotors are heavier as well. But either way, I love this thing. It feels very fast and certainly looks the part. Now, I'm running an electronic group set on this road bike from this Chinese company called L-TWOO. It's their ERX. And as it happens, this is actually the third version, there or thereabouts, of this particular group set. But the astute among you may have noticed that this front derailleur here is actually from their first generation of electronic group sets, because this one, the third generation front derailleur, actually died on me while I was out and about, and I documented it in quite a lot of detail actually, so let me throw up some clips.
Okay, so this is the footage that I took when it failed while I was out riding, but it is pretty waffly, so I'll just cover what happened. Basically, I was trying to get a picture of the bike. It was this pic here, actually. I was trying to get a thumbnail for a review of this 360 camera, and it happened to get blown over by a gust of wind onto the non-drive side. You can see me point to the little scuff on the shifter here where it fell down. It was quite a gentle fall, nothing crazy, but after that the front derailleur started to shift slower and then it quit altogether. I initially thought it was a battery issue, but after checking the app, I had 41% charge. Anyway, I limped back home and sat outside my house. You can see here the signal to shift gets received. That green light on the rear derailleur confirms it, but there wasn't any movement. So back in the garage, I left it unplugged for a few minutes, and for whatever reason, we got a spark of life back.
Okay, so I've taken the chain off to play around with it, and I've plugged the front back in, and for some reason, it's just sparked back to life after being unplugged for about 5 minutes. Upshift into where? Shifting into the big ring sounds good. On the way down, does not. Ugh. Sounds pretty rough. It could be something like low voltage. Maybe the batteries need a charge. But either way, that does not sound very good. Okay, so I've just plugged it in, so it's kind of charging up. And have a listen to the front derailleur. Sounds much, much better. Oh, maybe not. Well, it did sound better. Oh, I don't know. Definitely something weird shifting into the small ring. I'll leave this
to charge up for a couple of hours and come back to it and see if that fixes it.
Anyway, the end result after a couple of attempts at trying to kind of bring it back to life, it's completely clapped out. When you plug it in and you try and shift, you get a really high-pitched electronic whine. So it's getting power, but there's no movement. This thing is toast. This older variant of their front derailleur from the first generation of this family of electronic group sets works absolutely fine. Everything's compatible and the shifting is perfect. But interestingly, I still have to use this clapped out front derailleur to charge it all up because it uses a USB-C charging there. So I almost have to use this like a kind of charging brick. So pull the power cable out of there, stick it in the bottom, and then use this to charge it up. Now, to speculate on why this occurred, I reckon this is what happened, right? So the bike fell over onto the non-drive side, and I think as it did, it clipped one of the shift buttons. So it was in the big chainring like so, did that, and then sat pressing against the large chainring, unable to shift like so for a couple minutes. I reckon that then burnt out the motor inside there and caused the failure. That's the only logical explanation that I can think of. But if you have any ideas, do let me know. Regardless, as it sits right now, it's actually been fine for the last 5 or 6 months. So, considering this is the most expensive build I have ever done, in terms of how it rides, what do I like and what do I dislike? Ultimately, this thing is a really stiff race machine, so feels fast, agile, nimble. It's just really, really fun to throw around as long as the roads are decent quality. However, I do a lot of my rides on kind of rougher English B roads, and because this thing is such a harsh ride, it is pretty punishing, especially on long days in the saddle. It is helped by the fact that I have quite a lot of exposed seat post here, so when you're sat on it, you do get a decent amount of deflection, which does aid in comfort. But that in itself is also a product of the fact that this frame might be a little bit too small for me. So it's a large, which is actually the equivalent of about a 56, because this does come in an XL frame, which is equivalent of about a 58, which is probably what I should have. I do have a 120mm stem on here, and I push the saddle a little bit back, so it fits me absolutely fine. But I do get a bit of toe overlap on the front wheel as well. So when I'm clipped in, yeah, I do clip the tire on tight turns. So I do need to be cognizant of that as well. One other thing worth mentioning, actually, this Magine crankset power meter. It's their PES P505. It's their kind of more entry-level model, and yeah, I've enjoyed using it. The power figures seem to be decently accurate. I will say though, a big criticism from me: the non-drive side crank arm is held onto the axle spindle with a single pinch bolt. It's come loose on me, I think, twice while I've been using it, and you have to like torque it down to within an inch of its life in order for it to kind of stay secure. So I could see people not tightening up that like enough, and the non-drive side crank arm just falling off during a sprint. So that's a definite design flaw with this particular power meter, but yeah, something to be aware of for sure. So last but not least, behind me, I've got my Chinese gravel bike, and it's easily the one that's changed the most, mainly because I've had it the longest, maybe 3 or 4 years.
So using this cyan blue gravel frame from ICANN, I built this thing up in early 2022. As always, I tried to do it on the cheap and used some basic aluminium gravel wheels and a mechanical gravel group set from Sensar, their 1x11 SRX Pro. Now, rather than basic mechanical disc brakes, I actually used this weird braking system made by Giant in 2016, I believe, called the Conduct SL. It basically mounted as the faceplate onto a Giant bike stem and converted cable-actuated brakes to hydraulic. It was honestly incredible, and the braking performance was so close to hydraulic disc brake. Anyway, I soon swapped that out for a genuine hydraulic gravel group set from L-TWOO, their GRT, and afterwards an electronic gravel group set, L-TWOO's EGR, which I'm still running to this day. On the wheel front, it's also been upgraded to these pretty cool looking one-piece 6-spoke wheels from Elite Wheels. They're Drive 6 gravel, which I'm not sure that they make anymore, actually. I upgraded the tires too. I had been running 700x43C gravel tires from Schwalbe, but I managed to squeeze on a set of 29x2 mountain bike tires, these Continental Race Kings, which actually works out to about 700x50C. Now, technically, this ICANN frame is only rated for up to 700x45C, but these tires fit with a decent bit of clearance. Yeah, actually love this upgrade, highly recommended.
Now, lastly, and in my opinion, the upgrade that has transformed this bike here, yeah, a cheap set of gravel suspension forks. So I picked these up on AliExpress from a brand called Kochevlo, K-O-C-E VLO. At the time, they cost me just 112 quid. I cannot recommend this upgrade enough. Here in the UK, well, at least in Oxfordshire anyway, there's not a lot of gravel. What usually passes for a gravel path is labelled a bridleway, which is effectively an old horse track or paths where farmers used to drive their cattle between fields in the countryside. They rarely look like this, which is kind of a nice forest track, and often take the form of quite rutted, muddy paths. I often refer to them as like a light mountain bike trail, to be honest with you. And with the original kind of rigid forks, these ones here that came with the frame, it's not nice. It's often quite restrictive in terms of where you can ride without being kind of shaken to pieces. So as soon as I put these cheap suspension forks on, absolute game changer.
There's actually only 4 centimeters of travel on these forks, but combined with the mountain bike tires, this is a UK gravel machine. It opens up so many more routes, and you can easily lock out the forks when you're back on tarmac to pick up some speed. I did a 100k gravel ride recently, affectionately called the Hell of the Cotswolds, and again, these forks were a godsend. In terms of capability, traditional gravel bikes have always been a little bit too close to, road bikes for me, but with the addition of these forks, I think this thing now sits squarely between road and a full-on mountain bike. Until I move somewhere with loads of nice logging roads or proper gravel tracks, a suspension fork on a gravel bike is a must-have for me.
Now, this bike has been sat in this configuration for over a year, so what issues have I faced? Well, for starters, the wheels have been absolutely fine, the frame has been completely bulletproof, no problems, and the forks, no issues there either. But yeah, I guess a bit of a common theme. The L-TWOO electronic gravel group set here has had some issues.
For starters, after washing it down with my garden hose after a ride, the rear derailleur died. I suspected a waterproofing issue, but it came back to life the next day after drying out, and since then, no more issues on that front. I've even had it knee-deep in water wading through a bog. The rear derailleur was completely submerged and it didn't skip a beat, so yeah, who knows. But secondly, part of the rear derailleur hanger snapped on me. I was riding along, failed to unclip, fell over like a boss, and then landed on the drive side. A tiny piece of aluminium snapped off this little shadow link, and it rendered the group set inoperable. I managed to bodge it and eventually got a replacement, but yeah, this is not a particularly robust design, let's just say that much.
But bottom line, this thing is fantastic. There's a reason I haven't really changed anything on this for over a year. It's kind of morphed into my perfect gravel bike, at least for the type of riding I tend to do around here. Now, cost-wise, right, if you wanted to put this together as it sits right now, it'll set you back about 2,300 quid, which is not particularly cheap, it has to be said. Although you could quite easily lower the cost by speccing out some cheaper wheels and maybe going with a mechanical group set instead of this electronic one here. And what about the weight? Well, let's get it on the scales. It's been a while since I've done it with this bike, actually, so let's give it a go, turn that on. Worth noting, I've got the Garmin mount, both bottle cages and pedals on here, so it's all good to go. Let's get it up on the scales there, like so. And it is swinging, what are we looking at? 10.1 kilos. So yeah, just over 10 kilos, quite heavy in all honesty. I'd love it to be closer to 9.5, but yeah, these wheels, while they look flash, they are actually quite heavy. So if you swap them out, you'd save a bit of money and a bit of weight as well. One other thing worth mentioning about this bike, actually, same as the Steel road bike, it's a BSA standard bottom bracket, but I'm running a DUB crankset, and well, I've replaced the bottom bracket once already. I think it lasted about 800 miles, which is pretty atrocious because it suffers with the same problems, but it's compounded by the fact that I'm often riding in the wet with grit and dirt or whatever around the bottom bracket. So yeah, if I was to do this whole thing again, I'd definitely spec this out with a Shimano standard crankset rather than DUB. So there we go, those are all the bikes that I currently have in rotation, but I've got a couple more sort of general updates for you and sort of how I ride. Firstly, I have completely ditched tubeless on all of my bikes, actually. I used to swear by it, but it's just become a bit of a faff. I'm fortunate enough to have 4 bikes in rotation, so I might have one bike sat on the wall in here for a couple of months, by which point, when I get it down, the tubeless sealant has turned to like chewing gum inside the tire. So, well, if you have like 1 or 2 bikes that you ride constantly, tubeless will make sense. But for me, and sort of managing my inventory, and the way I'm lucky enough to be able to have all these different bikes, it doesn't work. So I run TPU tubes on everything now, including my gravel bike at the back here. I'm running mountain bike TPU tubes. It just makes my life so much easier. The second update, I suppose, I'm now waxing all of my chains. I used to use a basic wet lube. I think I've got it in here. It's the green Finish Line lube. I swore by this for years and years and years. But recently I did a test run a couple of months back on one of my bikes with a waxed chain. I absolutely loved it. Not necessarily because the drivetrain is more efficient. I don't really care about that, to be honest with you. 99% of the reason for me is the fact that I can go up to my chain, rub it, and nothing comes off on my hands. It's completely clean. It's just so much nicer. You can chuck your bike in the back of the car, and if you accidentally like kind of rub up against the chain with your jeans or whatever, you don't get that horrible greasy mark on there. Plus my daughter sometimes comes in here, and if she used to grab onto a chain of a bike that was sat here, she'd just get crud all over her hands, but that's not a problem anymore. I've got a kind of quite cheap and quick way to get it done, so maybe I'll cover that in an upcoming episode if you want to see it. But yeah, that's what I'm doing. Whether or not I continue it into the winter, we will see, because I've noticed that when you get caught out on a wet ride with a waxed chain, you basically have to re-wax the entire thing because the chain starts squeaking and gets rusty very quickly. So that is a bit of a pain. So it's worked for me for the kind of tail end of the summer, but whether or not I continue it into the winter, we will see. But regardless, all of the chains on all of my bikes, including my gravel bike here, are currently waxed. Now, there are also one or two sort of common issues across my bikes, which I didn't actually mention yet, so I'll cover those. First of which was rattling shifters. So on the L-TWOO electronic group sets that I've got, so the EGR and the ERX, no problems there. But on the mechanical group set, so the Sensar Empire HRD and the L-TWOO R9 disc, those did actually rattle over bumps and stuff. So the problem has all been fixed, but I'll kind of demonstrate the issue. And the principle is exactly the same on the Sensar Empire group set on the steel road bike. Basically, you've got the brake lever here, and it kind of cocks back and forth ever so slightly. Can you see that? So as you're going over bumps, basically this part of the brake lever would rattle against the plastic piece behind it. It's a super easy fix though, and I can't really show you, so I'll throw in some sort of footage to demonstrate. But essentially, I got this stuff. So it's a little piece of adhesive-backed bar tape. I cut off a tiny little strip of it and then stuck it behind the brake lever here on the plastic. It doesn't affect braking or shifting in any way at all, and now it doesn't really move or rattle in any way. Problem solved. Another common problem, which is in no way exclusive to the sort of cheaper frames that I tend to deal in, slipping seat posts. It didn't happen with the steel bike frame actually, but on virtually all of the carbon frames I've ever tried, the seat post slips in. This is my hack, which I've covered in a couple of different videos. You need a bit of this. So it's kind of vinyl plastic packaging. Often bed sheets or Halloween costumes come packaged in this stuff. And I wrap the seat post in this, and it increases the diameter ever so slightly so it fits nice and snugly in the frame, and that basically solves the problem. So yeah, that might be a hack that you need to employ on some of the frames that I've shown. Now, there is one other aspect to these bikes that I did want to cover. When speccing out these builds, there's one component I've always been a little more cautious around, and it's the cheaper integrated carbon handlebars that you come across. In my experience, the quality can sometimes be a little more hit and miss. In this instance, I'm referring to these bars from this brand OG Evkin, called their Turbo X or Turbo Air bars. They get shipped with their frames when you buy them, or you can pick them up separately. In previous videos, I've discussed the fact that I wasn't kind of 100% sold on them. They sometimes creaked in the area where the stem clamped onto the steerer tube. Just the fitment around that region didn't seem perfect, and you needed to tighten up those 2 pinch bolts quite a lot in order to prevent any movement. I've had 3 sets of those bars from them actually. I'm running them on my Aero road bike, my steel road bike, and the kind of carbon endurance one as well. Now, while some of them were better than others, none of them were perfect in that regard. But a few months back, I found the source of the problem. Essentially, I found that this bore here, basically where this stem kind of clamps onto the steerer tube, I found it wasn't entirely flat. It was almost slightly convex. There seemed to be a high point in the middle. Hopefully you can see the edge of my calipers here rocking on that high point. And that meant that in some cases, you did need to tighten up these pinch bolts slightly above recommended torque specs in order to prevent these bars from kind of moving and rocking when you put pressure on them. In fact, on my Aero road bike, the carbon has cracked ever so slightly. Hopefully you can see that here, because I did have to over torque those bolts. But they sorted it. I sent my findings over to OG Evkin and they took a real deep dive into the production process for these. Basically, this is clear coat on this carbon here. And then for aesthetics, they add this black spray paint around the side. Black spray paint overspray was essentially getting inside the bore, so workers were taking a bit of sandpaper in there to remove it, and that would sometimes lead to those high points causing the issue. So yeah, they immediately cut that step out and sent me these a little while back. The inside of this bore is now completely flat, so that's pretty much problem solved. But yeah, that's just sometimes how it goes with stuff like this. I mean, I always think it would be so easy to whitewash this approach because it's quite straightforward to throw a bike together on the cheap, but it's often these small kind of niggling issues that only crop up after a few hundred miles and some investigation that can really cause headaches. So I really strive to be transparent with you all, because if you're looking to replicate this approach, you do need to be aware that issues like this can sometimes crop up. But anyway, that's pretty much it. If there is anything that I haven't covered or you've got questions about on any of my builds, do leave me a comment. I'll try to respond to as many of you as I can. And yeah, that's it. See you next time. Ciao.
It's the bonus clip time.
Right, so one more quick update here, and it's about this bike that I've got behind me, this Steel one, specifically the RIRO crankset. So I mentioned that I've used it for about 800 miles, no issues. But a guy emailed me with these pictures. Basically, it looks as if the small chainring has completely snapped off the crankset. So with these RIRO cranksets, they're 2x, so they've got a large and a small chainring, but they're not separate pieces. You can see here, this is a spare one I've got lying around. They're machined out of a single billet, a single piece of aluminium, but it looks as if this inner ring, the small chain ring on his set, has completely peeled off. So yeah, he was apparently in the small ring, got out of the saddle to put some power down, and yeah, just peeled off and caused him to fall over. So 73 kilos is what he weighs apparently, so he's certainly, not a large rider. That's pretty lightweight, all things considered. But yeah, I've never had any problems with the one-piece chain rings I've used. But yeah, what a weird way for it to fail. Certainly surprising for sure. If I was to guess, I would have assumed they'd taken a little bit too much meat off the aluminium where the small chainring kind of attaches to the rest of the spider, as it were. And if I look at the pictures, those kind of lips, the edges where they've snapped off, they do seem to be a little thin, at least when kind of comparing it to these other chain rings that I've got. These kind of bridges here where the small chainring does attach to the spider, I've measured them. They're about 4.5 millimeters in width. Yeah, if you look at the image that he's provided, they certainly seem a lot thinner than that. So maybe it was a manufacturing defect in this case. So yeah, maybe if you've picked up one of these RIRO cranksets, just check that bridging connection between the large and the small chainring. It should be about 4.5 to 5.5 millimeters deep. Any less, and maybe you've got one from a bad batch where too much was kind of machined off. It's difficult for me to say definitively because I don't have the broken one here to test. But yeah, I will say I have used these type of one-piece chain rings for thousands and thousands of miles, and I've never had an issue like this, but it clearly does happen. So thank you to the viewer that emailed me with that kind of failed crankset. Definitely worth keeping everyone up to date and adding to the kind of pool of knowledge, as it were, for stuff like this. So yeah, thank you. And yeah, that's it. See you next time.